Weeks after Israel denied targeting journalists, the lie collapsed in the most brutal way. Around 5 journalists were killed as they rushed to cover the aftermath of a hospital strike in Khan Younis. When the IDF drone saw that their crime was being documented, it fired another round. 20 people in total were massacred by the war criminals. The Foreign Press Association said it was outraged and in shock after Israeli strikes on Nasser Hospital. And honestly, this only confirms the prophecy Norman Finkelstein made when he described Israel as a monster state, one built on occupying Palestinian homes and ancestral lands while silencing anyone who exposes its crimes.
I think we've had today a couple of curious turns of phrase. I mean, tragic mishap does seem like a rather odd way to explain away a double strike on a hospital that has killed 20 people. Earlier, the IDF put out a statement saying that it does not target journalists as such. And as you said, Benjamin Netanyahu saying it does value the work of journalists, medical staff, and all civilians. It says there's going to be a thorough investigation. I think history shows that quite often these investigations, despite the fact that earlier the IDF said that it would have full transparency, these investigations don't turn out to be completely transparent and very rarely get to the full facts of the matter or hold somebody accountable. So we will wait and see on this one. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu ends that statement by saying, our war is with Hamas terrorists, our just goals are defeating Hamas and bringing our hostages home. And ultimately, he will say that everything that is happening is because of Hamas. That if Hamas were to release these hostages, then Israel would cease its bombardment, that any kind of ceasefire would have to be predicated on the basis of releasing hostages. The flip side of that is that there are plenty within Israel who believes that the country should stop this, that it should stop the war, that is the key to bringing hostages home. And there are even those, certainly within the Israeli military, who are uncomfortable about the plans for further military action that the country is going through, and certainly those who believe that what happened today was an absolutely appalling error that is going to cost support. I mean, ultimately, he may say this was a mishap, but this hospital is very well known. It's the only functioning hospital in the south of Gaza. It's also known as a place where journalists gather to use the internet and to pursue stories. To attack this hospital was very likely to seriously injure journalists. But I think the big question that people want to know is why on earth this double attack?
Now, before I go deeper, do me a favor. Hit the like button so this video can reach more people. Drop a comment on whether the silence of Western human rights groups should be called complicity. And if you're new here, subscribe to support the work we're doing. A heartbreaking video has surfaced showing journalist Maryam Abu in an interview just days before she was murdered.
المصورة الصحفية مريم أبو دقة من قطاع غزة، أعمل لدى الاندبندنت العربية صحيفة بريطانية فريلانسر. بعد استئناف الحرب زاد عندنا الخوف، لأنه فعليا الاحتلال بيستهدف الصحفي لأنه بقوم على نقل حقيقة والصورة للعالم الخارجي. الاحتلال ما بده حدا ينقل ما بده يعرف العالم الخارجي شو بيصير فينا من استهدافات، من قتل الأطفال، من حرب إبادة. فبيعمل على استهداف الصحفيين عشان بس هو يعمل على نشر الفيديوهات اللي بتخصه من جانب آخر وليس من جانبين. في بداية الحرب على قطاع غزة كان في تفاعل كتير من الدول العربية والأجنبية، ومن خلال المسيرات، الاعتصامات، بدأ بالتفاوض، الضغط على إسرائيل حتى تم وقف الحرب على قطاع غزة. ولكن في الفترة الأخيرة من إنهاء الحرب ومدة الهدنة وأيضا استئناف الحرب بيعتبروا إشي ولم يحصل، بيعتبروا إنه غزة مش موجودة. قتل الأبرياء والأطفال باعتبارهم عندهم إشي عادي. الواقع بيختلف كليا عن المواقع. احنا بننقل الصورة ولا بتعتبر على بيصير فينا في قطاع غزة 50% أو 40% بننقل مما يحدث فينا في قطاع غزة. أنا كصحفية من قطاع غزة رسالتي للعالم يقفوا معنا، نعيش بأمان، يوقفوا الحرب على قطاع غزة بيديهم، وإيد بإيد وكل الدول تقدر تقف ضد إسرائيل حتى توقف الحرب على قطاع غزة. هي رسالتنا للمؤسسات الدولية للصحفيين تعمل على دعم الصحفيين، توفير حماية لهم. إحنا سنة و5 شهور من الحرب، تدمير معداتنا.
It's going viral, and in another clip she appears as a humanitarian, a daughter who once saved her father and then turned her life towards saving her people. And then there's the third video. No sound, just images, recorded only hours before the IDF war criminals struck and ended her life. That raises a question I can't shake. Where are the so-called women's rights groups in the West? How did they all go completely silent? Reuters even shocked the world by describing some of the slain journalists as contractors, including people who actually worked for them.
What's happening now is barbarism in the extreme.
Meanwhile, a British doctor bluntly stated that Israel's intention is clear. It does not want journalists or aid workers in Gaza, period.
I left Nasser just about 4 weeks ago. It's been bombed several times in the last 22 months. This is as bad as any. 15 people have been killed. 4 journalists we've heard about. Medical students have been killed. Security people have been killed. It is murder. These are war crimes, killing innocent civilians. And it is as barbaric as anything I have seen in Gaza over the last 22 months.
Here's the painful reality. An initial inquiry reveals that an hour before the double strike on Nasser Medical Complex, journalists on site saw an Israeli surveillance quadcopter inspecting the hospital in detail. In other words, the IDF knew full well that journalists were there. The attack wasn't random, it was carefully calculated. First, a strike killed journalist Hamza al-Masri. Then, the Israeli military waited for his colleagues to come retrieve his body before bombing the same spot again. The horror didn't end there. Journalists had been forced to the floor of the hospital, using their cell phones and eSIMs to try to connect with Israeli towers, because Gaza's telecom infrastructure has been deliberately destroyed. That's how exposed and vulnerable they were when Israel struck again. The IDF has denied any wrongdoing. Well.
Why aren't Palestinians the ones speaking for our cause? I remember the silence of the woman brought into the hospital injured, staring blankly and unable to speak. She had given birth 1 week earlier. She couldn't find her 7-day-old baby. Both her baby and her toddler were trapped under the rubble. There are no words that can adequately convey the pain and depravity of this aggression. There are no words. Why are we not there and able to speak? The Palestinian people, the people in Gaza. I want the whole world to know that I'm a human being. At the end, I am not pen on paper. I'm not anonymous. I'm a human being created by God. Times over the past decade. Most recently, as part of an emergency medical team working in a hospital. Our Palestinian colleagues are not here today because the systems we currently exist in don't recognize the value of Palestinian life. Hundreds of healthcare workers have been held in Israeli captivity. At least 4 have been killed while in detention. Their bodies are still being held. Every single healthcare worker I met in Gaza has lost family, has lost friends, has lost colleagues. Every single healthcare worker I met has been displaced multiple times, has been forced out of the hospitals where they work.
Norman Finkelstein has said repeatedly that nobody should be surprised when Israel targets civilians, journalists, or aid workers. It's part of the script for the greater subjugation of Palestinians and the survival of a state built on the wrong foundation. He has been one of the loudest voices calling the world's attention to Palestine and the Zionist project, and now the truth he warned about is laid bare for all to see.
Speaking about now the Egyptian occupation of Gaza. The recurring image, beginning in the 1950s, is everybody who's coming to Gaza, they keep referring to Gaza as, quote, a concentration camp. It was, if you look up at the memoir of the senior UN official there, E.L.M. Burns, in his account of his stint in Gaza, he describes it as a concentration camp. If you fast forward now to 1967, when Israel occupies Gaza, shortly thereafter, if you remember, those of you who remember Al Gore, the Democratic Party presidential candidate, his father was also a senator. Senator Gore goes to visit Gaza. He comes back and he tells Congress, or members of Congress, what he witnessed there. He described it as a concentration camp. If you go then forward to 2004, the head of Israel's National Security Council, his name is Giora Eiland. He's having a conversation with some American representatives who are over there. What does he describe Gaza as? He describes it as a huge concentration camp. Now bear in mind that this image, this recurring image, was conjured up. This is before even the blockade of Gaza was imposed. There was a closure policy, what was called closure, beginning in 1990. But the real brutality of the Israeli occupation doesn't come to fruition until 2006. But already before 2006, going back to 1948, the recurring image is this huge concentration camp. The Israeli scholar Baruch Kimmerling, in his book Politicide, which came out in 2003, again before the blockade, describes Gaza as, quote, the biggest concentration camp ever. The situation, which was already, as you can see, quite traumatic, that situation is then exacerbated, it's worsened in 2006 when there are parliamentary elections in what were called occupied Palestinian territories, meaning the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And Hamas, the Islamic movement, running on a reform platform, because the current government, then and now, the Palestinian Authority was and is hopelessly corrupt. They run on a reform platform. Hamas, out of office, had a decent record for at least running charities, community services, had a decent record of honesty and integrity. They run on a reform platform, having very little to do with ideology, and they get elected. Immediately as they get elected, Israel, followed by the United States, and then the EU, they impose these brutal sanctions on Gaza. It's not an exaggeration to say the sanctions were quite terrible. Israel decided to impose on Gaza what was called a humanitarian minimum diet. Humanitarian minimum is the euphemism for a starvation plus diet. They wanted to turn the screws maximally on the people of Gaza so that they would overthrow or get rid of the government that they had elected. For those of you who date back as far as me, which means around 4 people in this room, the rest having been deceased a long time ago, one will remember that when in Chile, the Popular Unity government, Unidad Popular, when they were elected into power, and the leader, Salvador Allende, was an avowed socialist. When he was elected, the United States, in the person of Henry Kissinger at the time, who Professor Chomsky used to call the doctor of death, Henry Kissinger gave the order that we're going to turn the screws on Chile until the economy screams. Until the economy screams. Create enough tumult and discontent with the government that you can create a popular base for overthrowing it. And that's, you might call, standard operating procedure, and Israel adopted that strategy. It was going to cause so much torment and torture among the people of Gaza that they would overthrow or rid themselves of Hamas. So they put Hamas on what they called humanitarian minimum, what I think would properly would be called a starvation plus diet. And they said, they were very open about it, we're going to keep the economy on the precipice of complete collapse. And that meant things like coriander, baby chicks, chocolate, children's storybooks, this huge list of things which were prohibited from going into Gaza. Unemployment by 2000, by October 2023, unemployment among youth was about 60%. The young people in Gaza, those who ended up joining Hamas and participate on October 7th, most of them, they had nothing to look forward to in life. Gaza is a small place. Its length is about the size of a marathon, 26 miles. Its width is roughly the distance, even at my age, I still jog along the beach, it's 5 miles. That's the whole thing. And all they had to do, most of those young people, all they had left to do, because there was no work because of that blockade, all they had to do was get up each morning and pace the perimeter of Gaza. And that's all they had to look forward to in life, in their earthly existence. Hamas tried to compromise and made all sorts of attempts to try to get that blockade lifted. Now, lest I be accused of being a Hamas apologist, I neither apologize nor do I condemn, at least when I'm giving a factual presentation. I'm laying out the facts. It doesn't speak to what my political convictions or beliefs are. It's simply a factual recitation of what happened. Hamas attempted to reach a compromise on the basis of what's called the two-state settlement and international law, the basic principles under our current world system for trying to resolve the conflict. All of those attempts were rejected by Israel and the West. Hamas tried to cooperate with international legal bodies. So, for example, after each of Israel's killing sprees in Gaza, these high-tech killing sprees, Operation Protective Edge in 2008-9, Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, Operation Protective Edge in 2014. I'm not sure if spree captures the magnitude of death and destruction Israel periodically unleashed in Gaza. To take the last case, or to take the last case I mentioned, Operation Protective Edge, Israel killed about 550 children. It destroyed about 18,000 homes. When the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross toured Gaza, remember we're talking about 2014, not what's happened since, he said he's never in his entire career seen so much destruction as what Israel inflicted on Gaza. And these high-tech killing sprees occurred with a steady recurrence over time. So Hamas thought, let's let in these international commissions of inquiry, because after every killing spree in Gaza, the UN Human Rights Council commissioned what was called a commission of inquiry to look into what was done and whether it violated certain principles of international law. Now, these commissions of inquiry were not very kind to Hamas, I should say. They were pretty brutal in their judgments on Hamas. They were much more brutal in their judgments on Israel, because the vast amount of death and destruction was committed by Israel. But they were not generous to Hamas. They accused them of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and so forth. I mention this because Israel, each time, refused to meet with the Commission of Inquiries, the UN Commission of Inquiry. They said, we won't help you, we won't participate, we won't join you. Hamas said, we will. They were willing to accept a harsh verdict on them in order to get some kind of action by the international community. Well, each time these commissions of inquiry produced voluminous reports, and each time the reports were very harsh in their judgment on what Israel had unleashed, and each time the reports were buried. No action taken. So Hamas tried diplomacy. It failed. Hamas tried leaning on international law. It failed. And then in March 2018, it's hard to believe it's so long ago now, Hamas tried, into tradition which will be familiar to people in this room, Hamas tried nonviolent civil resistance, what was called the Great March of Return. Hamas didn't actually initiate the Great March of Return, but it joined in, again, in the hope that maybe if diplomacy doesn't work, international law doesn't work, maybe nonviolent civil resistance will work. And I have to say, not as a self-criticism, but simply as an accurate rendering of the record, I had strongly encouraged that tactic. I thought it had a reasonable chance of success, and that proved to be wrong. We know exactly what happened because there's a voluminous Commission of Inquiry report, which runs to about 250 single-space pages, now collecting dust. Probably, I read it more times than the total number of people who read it. I know, I believe that. What happened? Along the perimeter fence, Israel lined up its best snipers, and according to the Israelis, every shot fired by the snipers, I'm quoting the Israelis now, every shot fired by the snipers hit its mark. We have no issue here about whether or not it was intentional or accidental. We got straight from the horse's mouth. And there's every reason to believe it. These were their best snipers. So, who did they hit? Well, the report says, and you can read it for yourself, they targeted, the Israeli snipers, they targeted children, they targeted medics, they targeted journalists, and they targeted people with disabilities, for example, double amputees.
Thank you for watching. Support my work by subscribing to enable us reach others. Thank you and God bless you.